humble driver walked into a bank to withdraw his life savings. Minutes later, he walked out, humiliated and empty-handed. What the teller didn't know? That man worked for Keanu Reeves. And when Keanu found out what happened, he didn't raise his voice, but what he did next stunned the entire world. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The alarm rang quietly at 5:47 a.m. in a modest apartment tucked between two aging buildings in downtown Los Angeles. Ramon Alvarez stirred before it could go off a second time. He didn't hit snooze. He never did. His movements were practiced, careful, and quiet. He rose, stretched slowly, then walked to the small kitchen and filled the kettle, all while keeping the noise to a minimum. His wife, Elena, was still asleep in the other room, her breathing shallow, her body curled beneath a worn but clean blanket. Ramon stood by the stove as the water heated. The apartment was neat, always neat, nothing extravagant, just order and discipline built over years of silent work. He made a single cup of tea, added a splash of lemon, and let it steep while he ironed his shirt in the corner of the room. He had ironed this same white shirt the night before, but he went over it again. Every crease mattered today. Every detail needed to be perfect. Laid neatly on the table beside the iron was a brown envelope. It looked ordinary. There were no markings, no printed labels, just a simple, clasped seal. But inside that envelope was everything. Every dollar, every coin, every tip Ramon had saved for the past 5 years. It wasn't just money, it was years of sacrifice. Years of saying no to himself so Elena could have hers. Years of saying no to himself so she might one day say yes to healing. She had been battling kidney failure slowly, quietly, the kind of illness that crept into a person's life, making everything harder without ever announcing itself loudly. The doctors said the surgery wouldn't be a cure, but it could buy her time. Time. That was all he wanted. More mornings, more quiet evenings with her beside him, more life together, even if it was just borrowed. He picked up the envelope and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, patting it gently to make sure it sat flat. Then he walked into the bedroom and stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment. Elena's face, even in sleep, carried a kind of tired grace. Her hair, now mostly gray, was pulled into a loose braid. Her hands, resting on her chest, twitched slightly with dreams or pain. He never could tell. Ramon stepped closer and tucked the blanket around her more securely. He whispered her name, just once. She didn't wake. That was fine. She needed rest more than words. He checked the clock again. It was now 6:12 IE. He had time before his first pickup. Keanu's call sheet didn't begin until 9. Ramon had planned it carefully. He'd go to the bank first, be one of the first in line, get the withdrawal done and return home before Keanu even stepped outside. But still, his heart beat a little faster. Not because he feared the transaction. He had every right to withdraw what was his. But because something about that envelope felt sacred. As if opening it in public, even just handing it to a teller, would expose the years of labor and love wrapped inside. The sun had barely begun to rise as Ramon stepped out of the apartment building and into the cool Los Angeles morning. He wore his neatly pressed shirt, black slacks, and polished shoes, the same pair he'd worn every day for 3 years. Not because he couldn't afford new ones, but because he believed in maintenance, in taking care of what you had, in quiet pride. He locked the door gently behind him and took the stairs down instead of the elevator. It was only 3 flights, and elevators made him nervous. He liked the steadiness of his own steps. He liked feeling his feet on something solid. The streets were mostly empty at this hour. A dog walker passed by and gave him a polite nod. Ramon returned it. The corner market hadn't opened yet, and the familiar hum of traffic was still distant. This, he thought, was the best time of the day, before the world got too loud. He approached the parking garage and unlocked the black sedan he drove for Keanu. The car was always clean, always ready. Even though he had no plans to pick Keanu up for hours, Ramon had already done his morning checks. Tire pressure, oil level, windshield clarity. Everything mattered when you served someone like Keanu Reeves. Not because Keanu demanded it, but because Ramon demanded it of himself. Today, though, wasn't about work, at least not yet. Today was about crossing a threshold he'd been walking toward for years. The final deposit for the surgery. The amount he held in that envelope was nearly everything in his name. It had taken thousands of rides, countless hours waiting in driveways, dozens of quiet dinners skipped. All for this. Ramon checked his watch. 6:33 a.m. Still ahead of schedule. Good. He started the car and pulled out of the garage, making his way toward the main boulevard where the bank was located. He drove slowly, carefully, as if the envelope inside his jacket was made of glass. The closer he got to the bank, the more his thoughts churned. Would they ask questions? Would they give him trouble because it was all in cash? Would they think it suspicious? He had paperwork in his glove compartment. Employment history, copies of past paychecks, even a notarized letter from Keanu's assistant verifying his job status. He had come prepared. Still, his stomach felt tight. He wasn't nervous because of guilt. He was nervous because this money wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that you could love someone enough to wait 5 years for one moment of relief. Proof that the system could still work. That if you followed the rules and kept your head down, maybe, just maybe, someone like Elena could have a second chance. The bank came into view, a large glass-front building with marble pillars and automatic doors that glided open with a mechanical whisper. Ramon pulled into the parking lot, parked in the furthest row, and shut off the engine. He sat there for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and felt for the envelope. Still there, still heavy with everything he had. Ramon stepped out of the car, buttoned his jacket carefully, and began walking toward the entrance. His shoes tapped softly against the pavement. He passed by expensive vehicles, sleek, spotless, parked closer to the door. Drivers in tailored suits and designer watches entered the bank with practiced ease. Ramon didn't envy them. He didn't want their cars or their clothes. He just wanted respect, a quiet kind, the kind his father never got, even after 30 years cleaning floors at a downtown hotel. The automatic doors opened and let in a wave of air conditioning that made Ramon's skin prickle. The bank lobby was large and modern, marble floors, glass dividers, chrome accents. A soft jazz melody played in the background, designed to make people feel comfortable, but Ramon didn't. He never did in places like this, not because of what was around him, but because of what was often reflected back at him. He took a number from the kiosk and sat in the waiting area, placing both hands on his knees. He kept his back straight, posture polite. The envelope, now warmed slightly by his body heat, remained tucked safely inside his jacket. He glanced around. A man in a navy suit stared at his phone. A young woman in workout clothes sipped coffee. The bank teller windows were staffed, but only 2 were open. The screen above beeped, and his number flashed in red. Ramon stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked calmly to the counter. The teller was a young man, early 30s, with sharp features and hair that had clearly taken effort. His name tag read Brad. He looked up briefly as Ramon approached, expression unreadable. "Good morning," Ramon said, offering a small smile. "I'd like to make a withdrawal." Brad nodded slowly, unimpressed. "How much?" Ramon gently took out the envelope and placed it on the counter. "This entire amount, please?" Brad's eyes narrowed as he picked it up. He opened it and peeked inside. Then he looked at Ramon, then back inside, then once more at Ramon. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "This is yours?" Yes, I've been saving it for several years. It's for my wife's surgery. Brad didn't respond immediately. He began typing on his computer, eyes flicking back and forth between the screen and the envelope. His fingers moved slowly, his posture stiffened. I'll need to see your ID. Of course, Ramon replied, reaching into his wallet. He handed over his California driver's license. It was clean, current, nothing unusual. Brad took it and looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Ramon again. You said you're a driver? Yes, for a private client. There was a pause. Brad's voice lowered a little, as if speaking only to himself. The chauffeur with this kind of money. Ramon heard it. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. His heart dropped. Not because he had anything to hide, but because he had everything to lose. He stood still, the kind of stillness that comes not from fear, but from years of knowing when not to push. Brad kept typing, and Ramon kept standing, still, silent, and slowly realizing this wasn't going to go the way he hoped. Brad stared at Ramon's ID for a few seconds too long. Then he looked back at the envelope resting between them as though it might suddenly grow legs and walk away. He turned the ID over in his hand like he was testing for counterfeits. His expression didn't hide his skepticism. And you're saying you saved all this in cash? Ramon nodded. Yes, over many years. Brad raised an eyebrow and gave a tight, dismissive smile. Most people don't do that. Ramon kept his voice even. It was easier for me this way. I wanted to have it ready for my wife's procedure. The clinic wants cash up front. And you're a chauffeur? Brad asked again, this time slower, as if Ramon hadn't heard the first time. Yes, for a private client. Brad leaned back slightly in his chair. Do you have any documents proving where this money came from? Pay stubs, bank statements, receipts? I have some in the car, Ramon answered quietly, but I've been saving little by little, mostly from cash tips. It's been years. Brad exhaled through his nose. Years. He tapped his keyboard again and shook his head, like he was waiting for something on the screen to validate his suspicions. Behind Ramon, a line had begun to form. A woman in a business suit sighed audibly. A pair of college-age men behind her leaned closer, whispering something to each other and chuckling. Ramon felt the tension settle into his back, into his neck, like it was crawling beneath his skin. He stood straighter, kept his eyes on Brad. This wasn't the first time he'd been doubted, but today was different. Today, there was too much at stake. I've worked with the same client for nearly 10 years, he said calmly. I'm on the books. I have documentation if needed. Brad didn't look up. Who's the client? Ramon hesitated. He didn't like name-dropping. It felt wrong, like using someone else's name as a shield. But he saw the judgment in Brad's eyes and realized he didn't have many options. Keanu Reeves, he said softly. Brad froze for half a second. Then he smirked. Right? Ramon's hands remained folded in front of him. He didn't flinch. I understand how it sounds, he said. But it's true. Brad finally looked up and locked eyes with him. You don't look like someone who works for Keanu Reeves. The words weren't shouted, they didn't need to be. They hit with quiet precision, like a pin pushed slowly into soft skin. The woman in the business suit shifted awkwardly behind Ramon. One of the men stifled another laugh. A customer at a nearby desk glanced over and then away again, uninterested in anything but her phone. Ramon tried not to show what he felt. His chest tightened, but his voice stayed level. I'm not here to convince you, I just need to make a withdrawal, that's all. Brad didn't respond. He looked back at the envelope, then returned his attention to the computer, typing a little more forcefully now. Brad sat back in his chair and crossed his arms, letting the silence grow between them. Ramon stayed still, waiting, refusing to show the ache building in his chest. He had faced worse. He had crossed borders, worked through illness, missed holidays and birthdays to build that envelope. But something about being questioned now, here, at the final step, made it feel like all of that struggle might be erased with a single smirk. "I'm going to need to speak to my manager," Brad said finally, picking up the envelope again and inspecting it like it was evidence. "You understand, of course. It's a lot of money for someone with an unclear financial background." Ramon didn't answer at first. Then he simply said, "I understand procedure." "Exactly," Brad replied, standing. "This isn't personal. We're just following protocol." But it did feel personal. The way Brad's voice tightened on certain words, the way he held the envelope like it was stolen, the way he looked at Ramon's shoes before meeting his eyes. It wasn't what Brad said. It was everything he didn't need to say. Brad walked off, envelope in hand, leaving Ramon standing at the counter, exposed. A few feet away, someone whispered something about random checks. Another commented, "It's probably fake." The woman in the business suit had already stepped out of line and moved to another teller. The two college guys snickered again and muttered something about drug money. Ramon heard every word, but he didn't react. He stood still, breathing through his nose, trying to stay centered. Brad returned with the envelope and handed it back. "I'm afraid we can't complete this withdrawal today." Ramon blinked. "I don't understand. Why not?" Brad straightened his tie and shrugged. "Without a verified source of funds, and given the unusual nature of the transaction, we're flagging it for review. It'll take some time." "How long?" "A few days, maybe longer. Depends." "My wife's surgery is scheduled next week," Ramon said, carefully. "I need to finalize the payment. This money has been mine for years. I've worked for every dollar. You can verify that." "I don't doubt you," Brad replied, though his voice made it clear that he did. "But we can't make exceptions based on stories." Ramon lowered his gaze briefly, then looked up again. "Is there someone else I can speak to?" Brad offered another tight smile. "You're welcome to make an appointment with our branch manager. But again, policy is policy. It's not up to me." The tone suggested otherwise. Ramon slowly reached for the envelope, sliding it back into his jacket. His hand trembled slightly. He hadn't expected celebration, but he hadn't expected this either. Not suspicion, not shame. He looked Brad in the eyes. "You didn't even try to see me." Brad's smile faded. He said nothing. Ramon turned without another word and walked away from the counter, past the line of silent observers, past the security guard pretending not to notice, and through the doors that opened far too easily for how hard this moment felt. Outside, the morning sun had risen fully, casting a golden hue across the sidewalk, but it did nothing to warm the cold settling in Ramon's chest. He stood still for a moment, blinking against the light. The weight in his pocket hadn't changed. The envelope was still there, but it felt different now, like it had gone from being a symbol of love and perseverance to something unwanted, something suspect. He walked slowly back to the car. Each step felt heavier than the last. The parking lot wasn't crowded, but he felt watched anyway. He unlocked the door, slipped into the driver's seat, and closed the door gently behind him. The silence inside the vehicle was immediate, pressing, almost suffocating. Ramon rested both hands on the steering wheel and let out a long breath. His eyes burned. He squeezed them shut, willing himself not to cry. He had held it together inside the bank. He had stood tall, kept his voice calm. But now, in the privacy of the car, it all began to leak through the cracks. He thought of Elena, asleep back home. She didn't know about this yet. She didn't know that the final step in her road to surgery had just been thrown into uncertainty. He thought of her soft voice the night before, thanking him again and again for everything. "We're almost there," she had whispered. "We're almost safe." And now, this. He pulled out the envelope and held it in his lap. It was just paper, but to him it felt sacred. A ledger of love. He had counted and recounted the bills inside more times than he could remember. Each one represented a choice to put her first, a choice to believe that one day it would all matter. He looked into the rear-view mirror and saw himself, neatly dressed, shaved, presentable. But in the eyes of that teller, none of it had mattered. All Brad had seen was someone he assumed didn't belong, a working man with too much money, a story that didn't fit the image he expected. Ramon put the envelope back into his jacket and sat in silence. He had 30 minutes before he was due to pick up Keanu. He could either go home and lie to Alina, or move forward and keep the day on schedule. There was never really a choice. Not for men like him. He checked the mirrors, started the engine, and eased the car back onto the road. The morning traffic had begun to build. Pedestrians rushed to work. The city was waking up in full force, alive with motion and noise, but inside the car, it was quiet. Ramon adjusted the seat, rolled his shoulders, and let his hands settle back on the wheel. At 8:58 a.m., he arrived outside Keanu's building. At 9:02, the actor walked out, dressed casually in jeans and a black shirt, coffee in hand. "Morning, Ramon," Keanu said with a warm smile as he got in the back seat. Ramon answered softly, "Good morning, sir." But the warmth wasn't there in his voice. Not today. Ramon remained in the driver's seat for several minutes after the engine had stopped. The sedan was parked precisely where it always waited, by the curb just outside the lobby of Keanu's apartment building. The dashboard glowed faintly. His hands rested on the wheel, not gripping it, just holding it like it was the only solid thing left in the world. He glanced into the rearview mirror. The reflection staring back at him looked composed on the surface, but his eyes betrayed everything. They were red at the edges. The skin around them sagged with weariness. He ran a hand over his face slowly, then reached for a tissue from the console and dabbed the corner of his eyes. Just enough to erase the visible signs, not enough to erase what he felt. Ramon had always taken pride in being invisible when needed. He knew how to blend into the background, how to serve without being seen, how to listen without making others uncomfortable. But today he felt exposed, not in the public sense, not like someone had shouted his secrets to a crowd, but like something inside him had cracked. The silence in the bank hadn't protected him. He adjusted his collar, checked the side mirrors, smoothed his lap. There was still a job to do. At 9:02 a.m., right on schedule, Keanu stepped out of the building. He looked the same as he always did. Casual, calm, grounded. A black t-shirt, faded jeans, a cup of coffee in one hand. No entourage, no noise. Just Keanu, as he always was with Ramon. Simple, respectful, unassuming. He opened the door to the back seat and slid in smoothly. "Morning, Ramon," he said with that quiet warmth in his voice. "Good morning, sir," Ramon replied, eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. But his tone was different, flat, lacking its usual timbre. Keanu noticed it immediately. He didn't say anything right away. He simply fastened his seatbelt and glanced around the cabin. Everything was clean, as usual. The air smelled faintly of citrus from the small vent clip Ramon replaced every week. The car hummed to life, and they pulled away from the curb. The city passed by outside. Glass buildings, palm trees swaying in the light breeze, pedestrians starting their day. But inside the vehicle, something was off. The rhythm between driver and passenger, so familiar, so smooth for years, felt disturbed, unsettled. Keanu leaned forward slightly, not enough to make Ramon uncomfortable, but enough to break the stillness. "How's Elena doing?" he asked gently. Ramon nodded, eyes fixed on the road. "She's resting. She has good days and bad days." "I'm glad to hear she's resting," Keanu said. "You told me the surgery's soon." "Yes, sir. Next week." Keanu offered a quiet acknowledgement. "That's good. That it's scheduled, I mean. I hope everything goes well." Ramon nodded again, but his hands tightened slightly around the wheel, his jaw flexing almost imperceptibly. Keanu didn't miss it. Keanu sat back, giving Ramon space, but his gaze stayed on the rearview mirror. He'd ridden with Ramon thousands of times. Morning pickups, late-night wraparounds, long highway drives after emotionally draining shoots. And he had come to trust Ramon's silence, even rely on it. But today's silence was different. Not peaceful, not composed. It was the kind that came from someone trying not to break. They reached the first red light on Wilshire Boulevard. The car slowed smoothly to a stop. Ramon's hand stayed on the wheel, but he didn't relax into the pause like he normally did. His eyes stared straight ahead, but his mind was clearly somewhere else. Keanu leaned forward just slightly again, voice soft but steady. "You sure you're all right, Ramon?" A second passed before Ramon answered. "Just a little tired, sir." Keanu didn't press, not yet. But something in him stirred, the kind of instinct that had kept him grounded in a world full of noise. He knew what grief sounded like when it was disguised as fatigue. He knew what heartbreak looked like when someone tried to keep it from showing on their face. Another silence settled, not awkward, but fragile. Ramon cleared his throat lightly and said, "I had to run an errand this morning before coming to get you. I went to the bank." Keanu didn't speak, just nodded for him to continue. "I've been saving for years," Ramon continued. "Every spare dollar, every tip, for Elena's surgery." Keanu's expression grew more serious. He already knew about the surgery. He had asked months ago how he could help, and Ramon had thanked him kindly but declined. It wasn't pride, it was principle. "I had everything in cash," Ramon said. "Didn't want to keep it in digital accounts. It felt safer to hold it, more real." Keanu nodded again. Ramon swallowed. "But when I got there, the teller didn't believe me. Said the amount looked suspicious, asked where the money came from. I told him. I even said I worked for you." A small crease formed in Keanu's brow. "Hell looked at me," Ramon went on, "like I was lying, like I didn't belong there. He refused the withdrawal, just sent me away." Keanu's fingers curled slightly into the seam of his jeans. "He refused to give you your own money?" Ramon gave the faintest nod. "Said I didn't have the right proof. But it wasn't about the documents. It was about me. He didn't see someone honest. He saw someone out of place." The car rolled forward as the light turned green. Keanu sat back again, his gaze distant now. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask for more. He just listened. And Ramon's voice, though low, carried the weight of years. "I've worked hard. I've kept to myself. I've done everything right. But this morning, it didn't matter." The car turned onto a quieter street lined with sycamore trees. A woman walked her dog along the sidewalk. 2 kids waited at a bus stop. Normal scenes from a normal day. But to Ramon, the world no longer felt neutral. It felt harder, heavier, like the ground itself had tilted just slightly against him. He loosened his grip on the wheel as they reached another red light. The hum of the engine was steady, but the silence in the car had changed again. Keanu wasn't looking at the street anymore. He was looking directly into the rearview mirror, watching Ramon with quiet attention. "You didn't deserve that," Keanu said at last. His voice was calm, but there was a steel edge behind the words. Ramon didn't respond. He kept his eyes ahead. "Did he say anything else?" Ramon gave a slight shrug. "He asked if I had proof. Pay stubs, receipts. I said most of it came from tips. I offered to go get documents from the car." "Did you tell him how long you've been working?" "I did. I told him about Elena. I told him I'd saved for years. And still, he denied it." "Yes, sir." Keanu leaned back in his seat again. He didn't speak. His fingers tapped lightly on his knee, a quiet rhythm of thought. His eyes no longer scanned the road. They stared at nothing for a while, as if trying to understand how someone like Ramon, who had never asked for anything, never missed a pickup, never stepped out of line, could be treated like that. Ramon's shoulders slumped, just barely. It was the first time his posture had faltered behind the wheel in years. "I know I don't look like someone who'd have that kind of money," he said quietly. "I'm not naive. I've lived with that look my whole life. But today it got to me. Maybe because I thought I'd finally done something right, and it still wasn't enough." Keanu didn't respond right away. Then he asked, "What was the teller's name?" Ramon hesitated, surprised by the question. "Brad," he said after a moment. Keanu nodded slowly, repeating the name under his breath. "Brad." He didn't say anything else, just sat in silence as they continued down the road, but something had shifted in his posture. His usual relaxed demeanor was replaced with something deliberate, something focused. The silence in the car stretched again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like the pause before something inevitable, like the hush before thunder. Ramon adjusted the rearview mirror once more and saw Keanu looking out the window, jaw tight, eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in quiet, purposeful reflection. Ramon didn't ask what Keanu was thinking. He didn't need to, because after all these years, he'd learned something about the man in the back seat. Keanu didn't need to raise his voice to make a statement. He just needed a reason. And now, he had one. The car rolled past Sunset Boulevard, where giant billboards towered overhead and morning joggers weaved between tourists just beginning to spill onto the sidewalks. The city was waking up fast, but inside the car, time moved slower. The rhythm of the ride was smooth, as always. Ramon knew the streets. He knew every turn, every light cycle. But this morning there was no music playing in the background, no idle conversation about the day's itinerary, just silence that sat between them like an unfinished sentence. Keanu glanced out the window, then back toward the mirror. His gaze wasn't invasive, just observant. He had a way of reading people without pressing. Still, today felt different. Today he felt something in Ramon he couldn't ignore. They stopped at another light, this time near Vine Street. Keanu leaned slightly forward. "How are you really doing, Ramon?" he asked gently. Ramon hesitated. His fingers adjusted slightly on the steering wheel. "Fine," he said after a pause. Keanu let that answer sit there a moment, but he didn't accept it. His voice remained calm. "I mean, not physically, not the surface stuff. I'm asking how you're holding up, with everything." Ramon exhaled softly, then tightened his grip, just a little. "I'm managing," he said. "One day at a time." Keanu leaned back again, sensing that this would take patience. He didn't want to push Ramon into speaking, but he also knew that if Ramon did speak, it meant something. After a few more blocks, Ramon broke the silence on his own. "It wasn't just that they refused me," he said, voice low. "It was how they looked at me." Keanu nodded slightly, eyes still on the mirror. "It looked at me like I was dangerous, like I was trying to trick the system. I was standing there with the money I worked years for, and he looked at me like I didn't deserve it." Keanu didn't interrupt. "I even told him I worked for you," Ramon continued, "and when I did, he smiled like I was lying, like I had made it up." His voice cracked slightly at the end, but he kept his posture firm. He didn't let emotion bleed into his driving. "It's strange," Ramon said. "You expect the world to test you, but I didn't expect it to humiliate me." The car turned onto La Brea Avenue, where the flow of traffic slowed slightly. A delivery truck blocked part of the lane. Ramon adjusted without comment, gliding smoothly around it. "I wasn't asking for anything more than what I'd earned," he said. "Not special treatment, just decency." Keanu's voice was soft when he finally spoke again. "Did anyone else in the bank say anything, step in?" Ramon shook his head. "No. They all watched. Some of them whispered. A few laughed, but no one said a word." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. Then he asked again, calmly, "What was the teller's name?" Ramon didn't hesitate this time. "Brad." The name lingered in the air for a moment. Brad. Just one syllable, but it seemed to carry the weight of the entire morning on its back. Keanu repeated it silently in his mind, as if memorizing it. Not with anger, not with heat, but with a stillness that felt colder, stronger, and more lasting than rage. Ramon didn't add anything more after that. He didn't need to. The damage was already in the details. It wasn't about what was said. It was about how it was said, how it was meant. The car reached the intersection of Melrose and Fairfax. Keanu tilted his head slightly, watching a mother push a stroller across the crosswalk. His voice broke the silence again. Quieter this time. "I remember being 17, he said, and going into a bank with my mom. She was working 3 jobs at the time, barely sleeping. She wore the same blouse to every appointment because it was the only one that looked respectable." Ramon listened without comment, surprised by the shift in tone. The teller took one look at her paycheck, shook his head, and told her she'd never qualify for the loan. Didn't even check the documents, just told her no. She didn't argue, she just nodded, took my hand, and walked out. He paused. The car rolled forward. I didn't understand it fully then, but I remember the way her hand tightened around mine, like she needed to hold on to something before everything else slipped away. Ramon glanced briefly at the mirror. Keanu's gaze wasn't on him. It was on the horizon, but his voice carried a weight that said he hadn't forgotten a moment of that day. No one should be treated like they're a threat for trying to care for the people they love. There was another pause. The car moved past a mural on the side of a cafe. Bright colors, raised fists, flowers blooming from concrete. Ramon finally spoke again, more softly now. I kept thinking, what if it had been someone else, someone younger, someone who didn't have years of practice swallowing pride? Would they have walked away quietly, or would they have broken? Keanu nodded once. You shouldn't have to practice swallowing pride. I've been invisible most of my life, Ramon said, and I was fine with that. Until yesterday. Keanu leaned forward just enough for Ramon to see him clearly in the mirror. You're not invisible, he said, not to me. Ramon didn't reply, but something in his shoulders loosened, if only slightly. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The car rolled past another green light. A light breeze moved through the barely cracked window, and for the first time that morning, the silence between them didn't feel broken. He felt shared. They continued down Hollywood Boulevard, the street beginning to fill with the usual hum of foot traffic and delivery vans. Ramon made a slow right onto Vine, avoiding a bus lane. The drive remained steady, the route familiar, but the atmosphere inside the car had changed. What had started as a typical morning drive was now something else entirely. A conversation years in the making, one that neither of them had planned, but both somehow needed. Keanu leaned his head against the glass and spoke again, his tone quiet but clear. You've driven me for almost 10 years, he said. You've seen me at my worst, even when I didn't know I was at my worst. You've never asked for anything, not once. Ramon's hands tightened on the steering wheel again, not from anxiety this time, but emotion. I didn't think anyone needed to know, he said. What I do, how I save, it's just life. Keanu looked back at him through the mirror. But it matters. That's the thing. It matters how people are treated, especially when no one's watching. Ramon gave a small nod. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. When I walked out of that bank, I felt small. Not because I was wrong, but because I was treated like I didn't belong in my own life. Keanu closed his eyes again and pressed his fingertips together. I've been in rooms where people smiled to my face but saw nothing beyond it, he said. But I always had a way to walk out of those rooms, a way to make a different room. Ramon didn't speak. But you, Keanu continued, you stood in front of someone who had power over you in that moment, and you still walked out with your head up. That says more than anything. Ramon's throat tightened, and he had to swallow before he could speak. I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted to take care of my wife. Keanu leaned forward once more, just enough to make sure his voice carried fully. I don't care what kind of suit that teller wore. I don't care how calm he pretended to be. He humiliated you, and people watched it happen. Ramon stayed silent, but the air in the car grew heavier with unspoken understanding. Then Keanu asked again, his voice steady and deliberate. Brad, right? Ramon nodded once. Yes, Brad. Keanu looked out the window again. The next turn on the GPS route was still 5 minutes away, but his mind was somewhere else. All right, Keanu said. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Ramon didn't ask what he meant, because something had shifted. Keanu wasn't angry. He wasn't even rattled. He was still. And in that stillness, there was something unmistakable. Resolved. The sun was still low when Ramon pulled the car around to Keanu's building the next morning. His suit was clean, his shoes polished, the vehicle spotless, as always. Routine gave Ramon peace. The predictability of it, the small rituals. After yesterday's conversation, he didn't know what to expect. He had assumed Keanu might bring it up again, or maybe not mention it at all. Either way, Ramon had decided to put it behind him. He had a job to do. At precisely 8:58 a.m., Keanu walked out of the building. No sunglasses this time, just a black t-shirt and jeans, coffee in one hand, a calm but focused expression on his face. He stepped into the back seat, greeted Ramon with a quiet, "Morning," and buckled in. Ramon responded, "Morning, sir," as he shifted the car into drive. But before they merged into traffic, Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Before the studio," he said. "We're making a stop." Ramon glanced in the mirror. "Yes, sir. Where to?" "The bank." Ramon's hands paused on the wheel. He didn't turn around, didn't ask questions. He just sat there for a second, the weight of the word pressing into the silence. Keanu didn't offer an explanation right away. He just gave a short nod, as if confirming his own thoughts. Ramon exhaled slowly, then pulled into traffic. The bank wasn't far, just a few miles east, but the drive felt longer. A few blocks in, Keanu spoke again. "When I was 9, he said, my mother and I lived in a basement unit on the east side. Mold on the ceiling, cracked tiles on the floor, water that ran brown for a few seconds when the faucet turned on." Ramon listened silently. She'd cleaned houses for people who never remembered her name. She'd come home with bleach on her hands, smelling like other people's lives, but she always walked in with her head up. Keanu paused. His voice dropped just slightly. Every month she'd go to the bank to deposit whatever she had left. It was never much, but it mattered to her. One day, a teller, this guy with a gold tie and a clipboard, looked at her like she was wasting his time. She didn't say anything, just left. We never went back to that bank. The car rolled to a stop at a red light. The engine idled quietly. Keanu looked out the window. I never forgot the look on her face that day. Not anger, just disappointment. Not in herself, but in how easily she could be dismissed. Ramon kept his eyes on the road, but his voice came low and steady. "You don't need to do this," he said. I know. You don't need to defend me." Keanu leaned forward again, meeting his eyes through the mirror. "It's not about defense, Ramon." He paused. "It's about dignity." Ramon didn't respond right away. The word dignity echoed in his mind. It wasn't something people talked about out loud, not in his world. Not in quiet jobs where showing up early and staying invisible was part of the deal. Dignity wasn't expected. It was something you protected silently, without asking others to see it. They turned onto Beverly Boulevard. The streets were starting to fill with traffic. A horn blared behind them, but Ramon stayed calm, steady. He wasn't sure what Keanu had in mind. He only knew the man well enough to understand one thing. He didn't make gestures for attention. If Keanu said they were going to the bank, it wasn't for spectacle. It was for something deeper. Keanu leaned back in his seat. His eyes were fixed outside, but his thoughts weren't on the storefronts or passing cars. "I've worked with people who act powerful," he said. But real power doesn't need to announce itself. It shows up in small moments, the kind where no one's watching. Ramon nodded slowly. He understood that better than most. "I wasn't expecting anything from you, sir," he said after a moment. "Truly. Yesterday I just needed to tell someone. That was enough." "I know," Keanu replied, "and I respect that." Another pause followed. "But there's something about silence that bothers me when it protects the wrong person." Ramon turned onto the side street that led to the bank. It came into view at the end of the block. A familiar glass building that now felt less like a place of business and more like the scene of a wound. Keanu's voice softened. "You've shown up for me every single day. You open the door, you drive through the chaos, you wait while I do press or stunts or whatever else they need. But yesterday, someone looked at you like you were nothing." Ramon said nothing, "And that makes it my business." Ramon pulled into the same parking space he had used the morning before. He let the engine idle, then placed the car in park. The silence stretched between them for a few long seconds. "You sure about this?" Ramon asked. Keanu gave the smallest nod. "Yeah, I am." He reached for the door handle, but paused. Then he turned slightly and added one more thing. "You know what I remembered this morning?" he said. "The first day you drove me. You didn't talk much, but you handed me a bottle of water and said, 'Let me know if the seat's too warm.'" Ramon allowed a faint smile to touch the corner of his lips. "I knew then," Keanu continued, "you were the kind of man who sees everything, but never asks to be seen. That ends today." Then he opened the door and stepped out. The door closed softly behind him. Ramon watched from behind the wheel as Keanu walked toward the bank's entrance. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. There was no entourage, no cameras, no rehearsed swagger, just a man walking with purpose. A few people passing on the sidewalk turned their heads, whispering to one another, but Keanu didn't acknowledge them. His eyes were focused straight ahead. Inside the car, Ramon remained still. He didn't get out. Part of him wanted to stop this, to pull Keanu aside and say it wasn't worth the trouble. But another part, deeper, older, knew this moment wasn't about confrontation. It was about recognition. For once, someone like him wouldn't have to raise their voice to be heard. Someone else would speak, not louder, but with the kind of presence no one could ignore. Through the large glass windows of the bank, Ramon could see the security guard at the front desk do a double take as Keanu stepped inside. The receptionist blinked, confused. People in line began to murmur. Phones came out. The room changed just from his presence alone. But Keanu didn't play into it. He walked calmly to the counter and waited. Ramon shifted in his seat, heart pounding, not out of fear, but from something more vulnerable. Hope. The kind of hope that felt dangerous because it wasn't rooted in fantasy, but in the chance that today might undo yesterday. A few more minutes passed, then the doors opened again. Keanu stepped out, walking calmly, just as he had entered. But there was something different in his posture now, something resolved, grounded. He returned to the car and opened the door, sliding back into the seat without a word. Ramon started the engine. No one spoke until they were 2 blocks away. Then Keanu said quietly, "Brad remembered you." Ramon's eyes flicked to the mirror. "He said that? I didn't have to." There was silence again. But it wasn't awkward. It was filled with the aftermath of something necessary. Ramon didn't ask what Keanu said. He didn't need to. After a moment, he said softly, "Thank you." Keanu looked at him through the mirror. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. "I did it because if someone like you can be humiliated that easily, then a lot of people don't stand a chance." Ramon nodded slowly. "And because," Keanu added, "when someone forgets their humanity, it helps to be reminded who's watching." They drove on. The world outside continued as usual. Buses honking, crosswalks blinking, sunlight climbing higher across buildings. But something between them had shifted permanently. Keanu leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes for a moment. And Ramon, who had driven countless miles in silence, finally felt that someone had taken the wheel beside him. Not to drive, but to stand with him. The morning sun filtered through the glass front of the bank, casting soft beams of light on the polished tile floor. A few early customers were already in line, checking their phones, shuffling documents, waiting for their turn. The hum of quiet conversations filled the room. It was just another Tuesday morning in a city that never stopped moving, until the front doors opened and everything changed. Keanu Reeves stepped inside. He didn't speak. He didn't wave or smile for attention. He simply walked in with the same quiet presence he carried everywhere else in his life. No security guards, no publicist, just him. Calm, grounded, purposeful. The first to notice was the security guard stationed near the front. His eyebrows rose in surprise, and he stood up a little straighter. A woman in the waiting area gasped softly and nudged the man next to her. They both reached for their phones at the same time. The room's energy shifted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Fingers fumbled to unlock phone screens. The digital chimes of camera apps opening echoed faintly. Keanu paid no attention. His eyes were focused on the reception desk. He approached slowly, his footsteps making almost no sound. "Good morning," he said politely. The receptionist blinked, stunned for a beat. Yes, good morning. I'd like to be assisted by Brad," Keanu said evenly. The receptionist glanced around, visibly caught off guard. "Brad?" "Yes," Keanu confirmed. "Brad. He helped a friend of mine yesterday." A hush fell over the room. It wasn't forced. It happened naturally, as if every person could feel something important was about to unfold. The receptionist picked up the phone with trembling hands. "One moment, sir." Across the room, phones were now recording. 3, 4, then 5. Red dots lit up. Keanu stood there, unbothered. Moments later, a door near the side hallway opened and Brad stepped out holding a clipboard. He was mid-sentence with another employee, talking about routine verifications, when he caught sight of the man waiting at the front desk. He froze. His face drained of color. Keanu turned slightly and locked eyes with him. "Brad," he said calmly. Brad walked forward, confused, stiff. "Mr. Reeves, what an honor. I didn't know you were. Can I help you with something?" Keanu didn't smile. He didn't frown. His expression was steady, unreadable. The silence stretched for just a second longer than most people could tolerate. "I'm here to make a deposit," Keanu said. "And to ask a question?" Brad glanced around the lobby. He noticed the phones, the customers, the cameras. "Of course," he said nervously. "Right this way." "No," Keanu interrupted, gently but firmly. "Right here." Brad stopped. Keanu stepped closer. His voice remained calm, almost too soft for the space. "Would you have questioned a man in a suit the same way you questioned Ramon yesterday?" Brad opened his mouth, but no words came. His fingers curled tightly around the clipboard, knuckles whitening. His eyes darted from Keanu's calm face to the phones aimed at him, then to the still room around them. Even the bank tellers had stopped moving. Keanu held his gaze without raising his voice. "I'll repeat it," he said evenly. "Would you have questioned a man in a tailored suit, clean-cut, confident, maybe wearing a watch that costs more than Ramon's car? Would you have asked him to explain where his money came from?" Brad's mouth opened again, but only a quiet stammer came out. "Sir, I was following procedure." "No," Keanu said, and this time his voice was firm enough to halt any further excuse. "You weren't. Procedure doesn't demand humiliation. It doesn't require judgment in your tone or suspicion in your eyes." A woman standing nearby lowered her phone slowly, her expression now thoughtful instead of curious. A man sitting in the waiting area looked down, as if ashamed of having stared earlier. I watched Ramon walk out of here yesterday, Keanu continued. He said nothing. He didn't complain. He didn't cause a scene. He just went back to work, like he always does. Brad shifted his weight. The clipboard lowered slightly in his hands. Do you know what he was trying to do? Keanu asked. He was trying to pay for his wife's surgery. He's been saving for years, quietly, honestly, patiently, and you made him feel like a criminal. I didn't mean, Brad started, but his voice was thin. It's not about what you meant, Keanu said. It's about what you did. The room remained silent. Even the phones recording now did so without the usual frantic energy. There was something sobering in the air. Something real. El told you who he worked for, Keanu said. Not to impress you, not to brag, but because he hoped it might help you believe he was telling the truth. And you laughed. Brad's face flushed red. He looked down, unable to meet Keanu's eyes. You looked at a man who has given nothing but respect his whole life, and you saw someone suspicious. Not because of what he did, but because of how he looked. Keanu's voice lowered again, steady and deliberate. So I'll ask again, Brad. Would you have treated him the same if he wore a Rolex and walked in with a briefcase? Brad didn't answer, and that silence, raw, exposed, said everything. Behind them, someone coughed quietly. A phone clicked as a video stopped recording, but no one moved, no one interrupted. Keanu stepped back half a pace and folded his hands in front of him. His next words came slower, as if meant for more than just the man in front of him. Dignity, he said, isn't something you get to hand out. It's something you recognize. And yesterday, you refused to see it. The air in the bank lobby had changed. It was no longer charged with curiosity or excitement. Now it held something heavier. Reflection, discomfort, awareness. Brad stood frozen, his eyes lowered, shoulders slightly slumped. The clipboard now hung loosely in his hands, forgotten. He looked smaller than he had when he first stepped out from the side hallway. Less assured, less rehearsed. Stripped of his practiced customer service persona, all that remained was a man caught in a mirror he hadn't expected to face. A bank manager approached from behind the counter, his shoes clicking rapidly across the floor. Mr. Reeves, the manager said, voice breathless and polite. Please, if there's anything we can do, I'd be happy to speak with you privately in my office. Keanu didn't move. His voice didn't rise. No, I came here to speak to Brad. And I've done that. The manager hesitated, unsure how to respond. Keanu turned slightly toward the others in the room, addressing the space as much as the man. I don't want special treatment. That's not what this is about. He took a slow breath. But when someone walks into a place of trust, carrying everything they've worked for, they deserve more than a glance. They deserve respect. A few heads nodded quietly. The woman who had lowered her phone earlier now looked at Brad with a mix of sadness and disappointment. Keanu looked back at him one last time. You may not remember every face you see, he said, but some people remember how you made them feel for the rest of their lives. Brad swallowed hard, but didn't speak. Keanu reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out an envelope, thinner than Ramon's, but similar in appearance. He placed it gently on the counter. This is my deposit today, he said, but the real value here isn't in what's inside. He turned his head toward the glass doors. Outside, just past the reflection of traffic and sunlight, Ramon stood on the sidewalk. He hadn't come in, but he'd watched the entire exchange from where he stood, silent and still. Keanu didn't call him in. He didn't need to. He picked up the envelope again and walked toward the exit. But before he reached the door, he stopped, turned back to the crowd, and said one final sentence. He's not just my driver, he's my friend. And what happened here, that ends today. Then he walked out. No cameras followed, no applause, just the quiet echo of his footsteps and a lobby full of people who had seen something rare. Truth spoken, not with anger but with clarity. not with power, but with principle. Outside, Keanu stepped up to Ramon and handed him the envelope. "Yours," he said. Ramon took it without a word. Their eyes met. Nothing else was needed. Together, they walked back to the car, and as the bank doors closed behind them, what remained inside wasn't just silence. It was a lesson, one the room wouldn't forget. Keanu remained by the counter. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't pointed a finger, but the silence that followed his words carried more force than any outburst could have. The envelope still sat in his hand, its weight no longer just monetary, it was symbolic. A stand-in for the years of sacrifice Ramon had made. A symbol of trust, broken, and maybe, now, something being rebuilt. Brad stood frozen in place, his hand still clutched around the clipboard. His posture, once confident and mechanical, had slumped. He looked not just caught, but exposed. His gaze didn't rise. He stared down at the floor. The bank manager approached again, more composed now, but still uncertain. "Mr. Reeves," he said with a strained smile, "I appreciate your concern. Let's please take this into my office. I'm sure we can address everything more comfortably." Keanu didn't move. He didn't even glance at the manager. His attention stayed on Brad, on the counter, on the moment. "No," Keanu said firmly but without anger. "We're not stepping away. This isn't just about comfort." He paused. This deserves to be seen. That sentence echoed through the marble lobby like a bell. No one moved. Customers in line stood still. The tellers didn't call the next number. Phones stayed steady in the hands of those who'd been recording since the moment he walked in. Keanu gently placed the envelope back down on the counter, as if returning a truth to the place where it had first been denied. "You looked at that envelope," he said, "and saw something suspicious." He looked directly at Brad. "You didn't see the man behind it." Brad shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking around the room as if searching for a place to hide. Keanu continued, "That envelope was filled with years of late nights, missed meals, skipped holidays. That envelope was filled with patience, with faith in a system that should have protected him." He took a breath. "Instead, you made him feel like a criminal." Brad tried to speak, but Keanu raised a hand gently, signaling for silence. Not to silence Brad, but to ask him to listen. "Ramon is not just my driver," Keanu said. "He's the man who waited outside hospital rooms while I held my sister's hand. He's the man who got me home when I didn't have words left. He's the one who remembered to bring cough drops to set when I lost my voice in the middle of filming." He let that sit there. The room was completely silent now. Even those who didn't recognize Keanu from the beginning understood who he was now. Not just a celebrity, but someone speaking from a place of lived experience. Shows up every single day, whether or not the world sees him. And when he walked in here yesterday carrying everything he had, you didn't see a man, you saw a stereotype. Keanu paused, letting the silence speak for him. There was something deeply human about the way he held that pause. Not theatrical, not calculated, just real. Every person in the room could feel it. There wasn't a single cough, no shifting feet, no background noise. It was the kind of quiet that made people remember exactly where they were when they heard it. "Do you know how many people like Ramon come into places like this?" Keanu asked, hoping to be treated fairly and instead leave feeling like they've done something wrong just by existing? He didn't wait for an answer. These don't complain. They don't argue. They walk out, quietly humiliated, and the people who judge them go home without a second thought. Brad's eyes were on the floor. The clipboard now rested on the counter, untouched. Keanu glanced around the room. How many of us have stood by and watched that happen? There was a ripple through the crowd. A few people lowered their phones. Others shifted in place, the weight of the question landing quietly on their shoulders. Keanu turned back to Brad. "This isn't about punishment," he said. "I didn't come here to embarrass you. I came here because silence helps no one." He tapped the envelope gently with his fingertips. This money isn't impressive. It's not meant to be. What's impressive is the man who earned it, quietly, with integrity, without needing to be seen. The manager tried again, his voice lower now. Mr. Reeves, we'll conduct a full internal review. I assure you, this isn't how we train our staff to behave. Keanu turned to him briefly. Then let this moment be your training. A woman near the back of the line lowered her eyes. An older man in a suit uncrossed his arms. Everyone was listening. Keanu faced Brad again, his tone softening slightly, not with weakness, but with clarity. I'm not here to destroy your life, he said, but I hope this moment changes it. Brad finally looked up, eyes wide, his expression uncertain. Keanu held his gaze. You may not have seen Ramon yesterday, but now the entire world sees you. There was no gloating in his voice, just the truth, measured and unshaken. He stepped back, his hand resting briefly on the counter. If you ever want to know what strength looks like, he said quietly, it looks like the man who walked out of this bank without raising his voice. It looks like Ramon. Then he turned and began walking toward the exit. No one stopped him. No one spoke. He had said what needed to be said, and in the absence of noise, the room was filled with something else. Accountability. As Keanu stepped away from the counter, the envelope still untouched behind him, the tension in the room remained. But it was no longer the kind of tension that begged for drama. It was the kind that followed truth. Heavy, still, honest. He made his way toward the front doors. No cameras chased him. No employee tried to guide him into a private office. Every person there understood they had witnessed something rare. Accountability offered not through humiliation, but through presence. Words without venom. Silence with meaning. Just as Keanu reached the exit, he turned back one last time. His voice was softer now, but still clear. There are thousands of people like Ramon out there, he said. They carry more than we'll ever see. Don't wait until someone famous walks in to treat them with decency. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the sunlight. Inside, Brad remained frozen by the counter, face pale, his shoulders slack. The clipboard had slipped partially off the edge of the marble and landed on the floor with a quiet slap. But even that sound didn't draw attention away from what had just happened. The bank manager slowly stepped forward, his voice low but clear enough for Brad to hear. Take the rest of the day. Brad nodded numbly, gathered the clipboard and walked away in silence. As he disappeared behind the door marked employees only, a few people in the lobby turned their heads again. Not to stare, not to judge, but to acknowledge that something in him had changed. Whether it would last remained to be seen. Back outside, the sidewalk glowed with morning light. Ramon was still waiting beside the car. Keanu handed him the envelope without a word. Their eyes met. Ramon opened the passenger door, set the envelope down on the seat, and took one long breath. Then he looked at Keanu, his voice quiet but steady. I didn't ask you to do that. I know, Keanu said. That's why I did it. Ramon nodded slowly. I didn't think anyone would ever speak up for me. I didn't speak up for you, Keanu replied. I spoke with you. You just didn't know you were already speaking. Ramon looked away, blinking hard. Most people would have just walked out, he said. Keanu smiled faintly. You did. They stood there for a long moment before Keanu added one last thing. You've spent your life carrying others. It was time someone helped carry you. They got into the car, the engine started, the day moved forward. But the weight of that conversation, the words spoken, the silence held, the dignity defended, didn't fade. Inside that glass building, the customers were still processing what they had witnessed. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, they didn't just see a man named Keanu Reeves. They saw the man behind the wheel, and they remembered his name. It started with one video, just 42 seconds long, shot from the middle of the bank lobby by a woman who had kept her phone low and steady the entire time. In the clip, Keanu could be seen speaking calmly, never raising his voice, never breaking composure. The audio was clear enough to catch the sentence that echoed across every screen by noon. Would you have questioned him if he wore a suit? The video was posted to a small community forum online. Within hours, it had been reshared across platforms: Instagram, TikTok, X, Reddit. By nightfall, it had been viewed more than 22 million times. Headlines followed quickly. Keanu stands up for driver. Silences bank, with one question. Bank employee left speechless. By Keanu Reeves's quiet confrontation. The power of dignity in action. The story traveled faster than anyone could control. Even accounts that didn't normally post about celebrity news shared it. Not because it was about fame, but because it was about something deeper. People responded not just to the man who had spoken, but to the message behind his words. And then came the commentary. Celebrities tweeted their support. Veterans groups reposted the video. Advocates for economic equality and immigrant dignity praised Keanu's restraint and focus. Former service workers shared their own stories of being treated like they didn't belong. For the first time in a long while, the internet united around something simple. A man had been wronged, and someone had finally said what needed to be said. Ramon didn't find out about the video until late that evening. He had been out all day, driving Keanu, running errands, quietly trying to move on. When he returned home and walked through the front door, Elena was sitting on the couch with a tablet in her lap, tears in her eyes. "Ramon," she said softly, "come here." He set his keys down, concerned. "What's wrong?" She just turned the screen toward him. There it was, the bank lobby. Keanu? The envelope? The silence? Ramon stood still as he watched it play out. The clip ended before Keanu exited the building, but that didn't matter. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. His voice caught in his throat. "I didn't know," he whispered. Elena smiled gently. "You never asked to be seen. That's why it matters so much that someone finally did." He sat beside her, slowly. She reached out and took his hand. "You've always been worthy, Ramon," she said. "But now the world knows it too." He couldn't speak. He didn't need to. He held her hand a little tighter, closed his eyes and exhaled. A breath he didn't know he'd been holding for years. Outside, the city continued on, horns blaring, lights flickering. But inside that small apartment, something sacred had settled. Validation. Not loud, not showy, just steady, like the man himself. By morning, Ramon's phone had dozens of missed calls and text messages. People he hadn't heard from in years were reaching out. Former co-workers, distant relatives, even a cousin from Mexico he hadn't spoken to since his 20s. Most of the messages said the same thing. "I saw the video. I'm proud of you. You deserved better." Ramon didn't respond to all of them. He couldn't. It was overwhelming. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He had lived his whole life in the background, steady and unnoticed, and that's where he had always been most comfortable. Now, somehow, the world had pulled him into the light. At first, he didn't know what to do with it. The news media tried to contact him. Reporters knocked on the apartment door. 2 production assistants from major networks left cards in his mailbox asking for interviews. One offered to help tell his story. He tossed the cards into a drawer and didn't call them back. Later that afternoon, Keanu called. "Everything okay?" Keanu asked. Ramon gave a short, dry laugh. "I've never gotten this many calls in my life. Do you need me to say something?" "No, sir. Please don't." There was a pause. "I wasn't planning to anyway," Keanu said. "It's not about me." That part mattered to Ramon more than he could explain. Keanu could have easily stepped into the spotlight and made it about heroism or headlines, but he didn't. He didn't speak to the media. He didn't make a statement. He turned down every interview request with the same sentence: "This isn't a story about me." Instead, the focus stayed where it belonged. The bank issued a statement. It wasn't flashy, just a few lines posted to their website acknowledging the incident. It said they were reviewing their internal procedures, and the employee in question had been placed on administrative leave while a formal investigation was conducted. Ramon read it once, then closed the tab. He didn't feel angry. He didn't even want Brad fired. What he wanted more than anything was for someone in that building to feel what he had felt that morning: the disbelief, the shame, the helplessness of being judged before you'd even said a word. Elena noticed how quiet he'd become. "You're not doing anything wrong," she said as they ate dinner that night. "You're allowed to be seen. You've earned it." "I didn't do anything special," Ramon replied. "You showed up. That's what's special." He didn't answer. He simply looked at her across the table, grateful that in a world full of noise and misunderstanding, there was still one person who had always seen him. And now, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible anymore. The following day, as Ramon prepared the car for Keanu's morning pickup, something unusual happened. A young woman he didn't recognize walked up to him on the street, her phone still in her hand. "Are you Ramon?" she asked gently. He hesitated, surprised. "Yes?" She nodded, a little nervous but smiling. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you went through, how you handled it. It meant something to me. My dad was a bus driver for 30 years. People like you deserve more." She didn't stay long, just offered her hand, shook his, and walked off. Ramon stood beside the car a moment longer, watching her disappear into the morning crowd. He didn't know what to say, even to himself, but something in his chest felt lighter. Later, during the drive, Keanu remained mostly quiet in the back seat. But as they passed the street corner where the bank stood, Ramon glanced in the mirror. "I didn't expect it to go this far," he said softly. Keanu looked up. "Sometimes the quietest moments carry the farthest." Ramon nodded, then asked, "Do you think Brad knew what he was doing?" Keanu thought for a moment. "I think he thought he was just following instinct. That's the problem. Too many people confuse instinct with truth. They trust the wrong gut feeling." Ramon looked ahead. "And now?" "Now," Keanu said. "He's been shown another truth. What he does with it, that's up to him." That night, Elena sat beside Ramon on the couch again. This time, there was no video to watch, no news report to read. Just the quiet rhythm of their home, the ticking of a wall clock, the soft breeze from an open window. She turned toward him and placed her hand on his. "You remember when we first came here?" she asked. "How scared we were?" Ramon smiled faintly. "I remember not speaking for weeks outside the house. You said if we just worked hard and kept our heads down, things would be okay." He nodded. "It was the only way I knew." She leaned closer. "Maybe it's time to stop keeping your head down." Ramon didn't answer right away, but he didn't disagree. Later that week, the bank issued a second statement, this one longer. It included a formal apology, a promise to review in-person cash withdrawal policies, and a note that the teller involved had been suspended indefinitely pending a full training review. They ended the statement with a quote, "Everyone deserves dignity, regardless of their role, their clothes, or their balance." It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Ramon never replied to the bank. He didn't write a response. He didn't attend a press conference. He didn't need to. He had work to do. Elena's surgery was still scheduled. Bills still needed paying. But when he walked through the streets now, head up, shoulders square, people looked at him differently. And more importantly, he looked at himself differently too. It had been nearly 4 weeks since the incident at the bank. The media attention had faded, the news cycle had moved on, and things had mostly returned to normal. Ramon liked it that way. The silence, the privacy. The routine of waking up early, making tea for Elena, and preparing the car for the day. Life didn't need headlines, it needed rhythm. So when a knock came at the door just after sunset on a Tuesday, he wasn't expecting anyone. He opened it slowly, carefully, and froze. Brad stood on the other side. Dressed in a simple shirt, jeans, no clipboard, no name tag, he held an envelope in both hands. No cameras, no company car waiting at the curb. Just him. Ramon didn't say anything at first. He stepped halfway into the doorway, unsure if he should even ask why the man was there. Brad looked thinner than before. His eyes were tired. But there was something else in his face. Humility and fear. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," Brad said. "I wasn't sure I'd ever get the courage to do this." Ramon still didn't speak. Brad held out the envelope. "This is for you. I couldn't say what I needed to say that day, so I wrote it down." Ramon looked at the envelope, then back at Brad. "You could have mailed it." "I know," Brad said. "But I needed to see you. I needed to hand it to you myself." There was a long pause between them. Brad cleared his throat and looked down at the envelope. "My father was a taxi driver. For 23 years. He died before I ever told him I respected him, before I understood why he came home so tired." His voice cracked. "I think I hated him for how invisible he was, and I promised myself I'd never be like him." Ramon stood silently, his hand still resting on the doorframe. "Where I saw you that day," Brad continued, "I saw everything I spent years trying to forget. The jacket, the shoes, the hands. You looked like him, and I judged you for it." He swallowed, his voice breaking further. "I judged you to erase him, and it was wrong." Ramon took the envelope slowly, but didn't open it. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," Brad added. "I know I don't deserve that. I needed to tell the truth." Another long silence. Elena's voice floated gently from inside the apartment. "Ramon, everything okay?" Ramon glanced back over his shoulder, then turned to Brad. "Come in," he said quietly. Brad blinked. "Are you sure?" Ramon opened the door wider. "You didn't see me before. Maybe it's time I see you now." Brad stepped inside. The apartment was small, tidy. Warm light spilled from the kitchen and a kettle hissed gently on the stove. Elena appeared briefly in the hallway, nodded once to Brad without judgment, then disappeared again, giving them space. Ramon gestured toward the small table by the window. "Sit," he said. "We'll talk." Brad sat down, awkward at first. He looked smaller in person, humbled not by the media or public backlash, but by something deeper, guilt that had settled into his bones. Ramon poured 2 cups of tea and set one down in front of him. They sat in silence for a moment before Brad broke it. "I didn't know how to face you," he said. "I thought about walking away 100 times on my way here." "You didn't," Ramon replied quietly. "That's something." Brad took a slow sip from the mug and looked around the apartment. It was modest but warm, lived in, the kind of place that held memories in its walls. Photographs hung neatly on one side. A wedding photo, a picture of a younger Ramon in front of a yellow taxi with his arm around a man who looked proud, maybe his father. A quiet life, built piece by piece. "I remember my dad coming home and smelling like oil and leather seats," Brad said suddenly. "He used to complain that people never looked him in the eye, just handed him bills and walked off." Ramon nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. I used to think he was weak," Brad admitted, "like he didn't want more for himself. But I was wrong. He carried everyone and asked for nothing." Brad's eyes welled again. He didn't try to hide it this time. "And I didn't say goodbye the right way. We fought. I said some things I can't take back. Then he was gone." Ramon looked down at his tea. "I lost my father before I ever got to thank him too. He died thinking I wanted to be nothing like him." Brad looked up. Their eyes met. 2 sons, 2 wounds, the same ache. "That's why it hurt when you looked at me the way you did," Ramon said gently. "It wasn't just about me. It was about him." His voice whispered. "I know," Brad whispered. "I was wrong." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was the silence of two people letting something go. Ramon reached for the envelope, opened it, and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was a little uneven, but honest. The first line read, "You didn't deserve my contempt. You deserved respect. Just like my father did." Ramon folded the letter back and placed it beside his cup. Then he looked at Brad. "You were cruel," he said evenly. "But you came back. That matters." Brad let out a slow breath. "I'm trying to be better. I just don't know where to start." Ramon didn't offer grand advice. He simply said, "Start by remembering him. Not the shame, the strength." Brad nodded. They talked for another hour, not about the bank, not about the headlines, about their fathers, about work, about what it means to be invisible, and what it means to be seen. When Brad finally stood to leave, he offered his hand. Ramon looked at it, then took it. "Thank you," Brad said. "For what?" "For seeing me, when I couldn't see myself." Ramon closed the door behind him, then stood for a long time, staring at the letter in his hand. Outside, Brad walked away, not to forget, but to begin again. It was early morning when Ramon finally sat down to read Brad's full letter again. The house was still, sunlight barely pushing through the kitchen window. Elena had gone back to sleep after a long night of dialysis symptoms, and Ramon was alone with his tea and the envelope. He unfolded the pages slowly, the paper now softened from being handled the day before. The handwriting was the same, unpolished, slanted, but not rushed. Every word had weight, like it had been pulled from somewhere deep. "Dear Ramon, I wasn't raised to hate people like you, but I was raised not to see them. There's a difference. And I've spent years trying to understand what that difference has done to me. My father drove a yellow cab in New York City. He worked nights. I remember him coming home with cracked hands and a crooked smile. Sometimes he'd fall asleep in the hallway before he made it to the bedroom. I was embarrassed by him, not because of who he was, but because of what the world told me he wasn't." Ramon paused, staring at that sentence. It rang too close to home. He took a deep breath and continued. "As I got older, I promised myself I'd be more successful than him. Cleaner, sharper, respected. But when I saw you across the counter that morning, your jacket, the way you stood, the quiet calm in your voice, I saw him again. I saw the man I never thanked. I saw the man I blamed for making me feel invisible. And I turned that blame on you. I didn't even give you the decency of listening." Ramon could feel his throat tighten. He kept reading. "After the video went viral, I tried to hide. Then I tried to fight it. I told myself you overreacted. I told myself you were playing the victim. But deep down, I knew. I knew it was me who couldn't face his own reflection. I've started therapy. It took me too long. And in those sessions, I finally said my father's name out loud without anger. You reminded me of him, his pride, his stillness, his way of showing up even when the world pretended he didn't exist. I hated it because I never understood it. Until now." Ramon stopped reading. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper, then set the letter down on the table. He walked to the window and looked out at the morning traffic. The world kept moving. He thought about Brad's visit, his tears, his apology, the way his hands trembled when he spoke about his father. It would have been easy to dismiss it all as performative, but something about it had felt real. Still, reality required more than words. Ramon returned to the table, picked up a pen, and jotted a note on a separate piece of paper. Words matter only if they lead to better actions. He folded it once and placed it beside Brad's letter. Then he made a phone call. Not to Brad, but to a local group he'd heard Keanu mention once. A volunteer organization dedicated to dignity in labor. People from every profession, cleaners, drivers, baristas, mechanics, gathered to share stories and support one another. He asked if they accepted new members. They said yes. Later that week, Brad showed up again. Not at Ramon's home this time, but at a downtown church basement where the Dignity Outreach Group held their weekly circles. Ramon hadn't told him to come. No one had. But there he was, nervous, underdressed, carrying a notebook and that same quiet, unsettled energy. He didn't ask to speak, he just listened. That night, as stories were shared about janitors passed over for promotions, a nurse's aide mistaken for someone's assistant, a construction worker who hadn't hugged his daughter in 2 weeks because of the dirt under his nails, Brad sat still, eyes wide, absorbing every word. At the end, the group leader asked if anyone new wanted to say something. Brad stood. He looked at Ramon, not for permission, but with respect. Then he began. I used to think success meant distance, from where I came from people who reminded me of that past. But I see now, success without empathy is just ego in a suit. He paused, his voice trembling. I judged someone for carrying himself with dignity because I had forgotten what it looked like. My father deserved better. And so did Ramon. No one clapped. No one needed to. The silence said enough. Ramon approached him after the meeting. Brad looked nervous again, like he expected rejection, but Ramon simply said, I saw what you did tonight. Brad nodded. I meant it. I know, Ramon said. Now keep showing it. From that night on, Brad kept returning, not just to listen, but to help. He took on small volunteer roles, organizing donations, helping elderly members get rides, even speaking at a youth event about the dangers of unchecked bias. He wasn't perfect, but he was consistent, and that mattered. A month later, Keanu asked Ramon during one of their drives, Have you heard from Brad? Ramon nodded. He's trying. Keanu smiled faintly. Trying's a good place to start. There was something poetic in how it all had come full circle. The man who once mocked another's dignity was now rediscovering his own by honoring the people he used to overlook. It wasn't redemption in headlines. It was quieter than that. More lasting. One afternoon, Brad handed Ramon a small envelope. Inside was a donation receipt, anonymously submitted to a foundation that helped pay for transportation services for low-ink patients needing dialysis treatment. The amount wasn't flashy, but the message on the note taped to it was everything. In honor of the men who drove through storms to get home, Ramon folded the note and tucked it into his wallet behind his driver's license. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Later that evening, as he and Elena sat on the balcony, she asked, Do you think he's changed? Ramon thought about it for a long time. I think he's beginning to see, he said. And that's how real change always begins. She reached over and held his hand, resting her head against his shoulder. You were never invisible, she whispered. Ramon closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from peace. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the bank, headlines changed tone. This time, it wasn't about Keanu Reeves or even about viral outrage. It was about what came after. The bank where Brad worked, one of the largest chains on the West Coast, released a formal statement on their homepage. In bold letters above the fold, it read, Holland Moment can reveal everything. It's what we do next that defines us. David Halperin, president and CEO. It wasn't just a PR move. Something real had shifted. The bank had launched a new internal initiative titled Empathy in Practice. It was more than a memo. It was a company-weighted training program designed to rebuild trust where it had quietly eroded for years. The first module was optional, yet attendance overflowed. Employees across departments, tellers, managers, loan officers, even executives were asked to gather in small, in-person sessions. On the screen in the front of the training room, a single sentence appeared to begin the presentation. Hamilton raised his voice, but he raised a mirror. Then came the video, a 5-minute montage approved by Ramon, summarizing what had happened. It showed Keanu entering the bank, his steady voice, Brad's silence, the words that shook the room. Would you have questioned a man in a suit? Then the clip paused, and Ramon's voice was heard in a recorded interview. I never asked for special treatment. I just wanted to be seen as human. That line hung in the air. After the first session ended, people didn't rush out of the room. They stayed, quiet, reflective, changed. Brad attended every session, sitting in the front row, never once speaking unless called on. When he was eventually asked why he kept coming, he simply replied, "Because I'm still learning, and I need to keep learning." He sat beside newer tellers, some of whom had only heard about the incident secondhand. They asked him questions. He answered honestly. One woman, a trainee, raised her hand and asked, "How did you not see him?" Brad didn't dodge. "Because I didn't want to," he said. "Because it was easier not to look." The room fell silent again. Meanwhile, Ramon continued driving. He never boasted about the program, never asked for recognition, but one day Keanu brought it up during a quiet morning ride through Laurel Canyon. "They're using your story," he said, "to change how they see people." Ramon glanced in the mirror, eyes steady. "As long as they mean it," he replied, "I'm okay with that." And he meant it. Elena, always skeptical of institutions, was moved when she read a printed email from the program coordinator thanking Ramon for letting them share his experience. "I never thought a bank could feel remorse," she said. "Maybe the world really is shifting." "Maybe it's just listening for once," Ramon answered. The training expanded across branches statewide. Soon other companies reached out, retail chains, transportation services, even a hotel group that wanted to implement similar empathy modules. And everywhere the program went, it carried Ramon's story, not as a scandal, but as a compass. At one session in Santa Monica, a young teller named Erica approached the front of the room. She held a copy of the training materials, her hands shaking. "I watched the video 5 times, she said. "I couldn't stop thinking about the way Brad looked when Keanu spoke. He wasn't just being confronted. He was being awakened. And I think a lot of us need that." Across the state, more stories emerged. A customer in Sacramento wrote to the bank's headquarters, thanking a teller for treating me like a person, not a problem. A branch manager in Long Beach shared that after the session, his team stayed late to talk not about sales quotas, but about dignity. At the center of it all was Ramon, quiet, present, never once stepping forward to demand credit. When the bank invited him to speak at an internal leadership summit, he hesitated. Public speaking was never his strength. But Elena encouraged him. "You don't have to perform," she said. "You just have to be who you are." So, he agreed. At the summit, in front of nearly 400 employees seated in a grand hall, Ramon stood at a podium with no notes, no slides, just the brown envelope in his hand. "This," he said, lifting the envelope gently, "is what I brought to the bank that day. Not to threaten, not to trick, but to pay for something that mattered. My wife's health." He paused, letting his words settle. "I was turned away because someone decided what I looked like told them who I was." He scanned the room. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just eyes, fixed, quiet, open. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here because someone chose to listen. And that changed more than just one moment. It's changing the way you all see the people who walk through your doors." He closed the envelope and nodded once. "That's all I came to say." The applause was soft at first. Then it grew, not thunderous, not theatrical, but deeply sincere. Afterwards, the bank president met Ramon in the wings. "You've done something we couldn't," he said. "You reminded us why we got into this business in the first place." Ramon shook his hand, eyes firm. "Don't forget again." "I won't," the man said. "Not after this." Later, when Keanu heard about the speech, he smiled as Ramon recounted it from the car. "You stood up," Keanu said, "even when they didn't ask you to." "I didn't do it for them," Ramon replied. "I did it for the next man, with a brown envelope." Word quietly spread that the empathy and practice training was being considered as a model for national rollout. News outlets caught wind of it, and headlines followed once again, but this time with a different tone. "Young man's dignity leads to industry reform." Keanu was asked for comment. He declined. Ramon was asked if he wanted to write a book. He declined too. He didn't need the spotlight. He had something better. Elena's surgery was scheduled. Fully funded, and every week, more tellers sat in more rooms, watching a man in a jacket, holding an envelope, asking to be seen. The sky was clear that morning, with a gentle breeze passing through the trees as families gathered outside the university auditorium. Rows of white chairs lined the lawn, each with a program tucked under the seat and a name printed in neat, bold letters. It was graduation day, and for the first time in months, Ramon didn't feel the weight of an envelope in his pocket. Instead, he carried only a handkerchief, folded twice, tucked neatly in his blazer. Beside him, Elena walked slowly but steadily. Her steps were careful, but her smile was undeniable. The surgery had gone well. She was still recovering, but today she had insisted on walking herself to her seat. She said it mattered, and Ramon, knowing his wife's quiet strength, didn't argue. They took their places in the fourth row, close enough to see the stage, far enough that their presence felt humble. Families around them buzzed with excitement. Proud parents clutched cameras, younger siblings waved handmade signs, and somewhere near the back, a baby squealed in delight. Ramon sat still, eyes fixed on the wooden steps of the platform where the graduates would walk. It felt unreal. Not because he doubted her, but because the journey had been so long. His daughter, Sophia, had worked weekends as a barista, taken evening classes, and studied late into the night at the kitchen table, often beside her mother's medical equipment, the soft beeping of machines filling the silence between flashcards and textbook pages. He remembered once walking in at 2 a.m. to find Sophia asleep, face buried in her notebook, one hand still holding a highlighter. He had pulled a blanket over her and stood there for a long time, knowing exactly where she got her perseverance. Now, as names were called and applause echoed through the air, that same daughter stood backstage in her cap and gown, nerves dancing in her chest. She looked out at the sea of faces, searching for her parents. She found them. Elena raised her hand slowly, fingers fluttering in a tiny wave. Ramon gave a short nod, his lips pressed together in a line too tight to hide the emotion in his eyes. Then Sophia spotted something else. Toward the back, beneath the shade of a tall oak tree, sat a man in a dark suit and sunglasses. He wasn't near the crowd. He didn't wave. He simply nodded once when her eyes met his. It was Keanu. He had arrived quietly, just as he had promised. No fanfare, no special seat, just a presence. Steady, respectful, and intentional. Sophia stepped forward as her name was called. Her heels clicked against the stage floor, a rhythm of pride and gratitude. When she reached the center, the dean handed her the diploma. She shook his hand, turned toward the crowd, and raised her chin. The applause swelled, not louder than the others, but deep, resonant. Her father stood, hands clasped in front of him. Elena wiped the corner of her eye with a tissue. And under the tree, Keanu stood too. Just for a moment. Just enough. Sophia walked off the stage, her heart racing. After the ceremony, the graduates spilled into the courtyard. The air was filled with laughter, tearful hugs, and the sound of camera shutters. Sophia held her diploma tightly against her chest, her cap now slightly tilted from all the congratulatory embraces. She moved through the crowd, scanning faces until she found her parents. Ramon was waiting, arms open. Elena stood beside him, leaning on a cane but beaming with pride. Sophia rushed into her father's embrace, and for a moment neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." Elena kissed her daughter's cheek. "We always knew you would." "I almost didn't," Sophia said. "But then you kept fighting, so I kept studying." They stood there a while longer, letting the moment breathe. Families bustled around them, but their world had narrowed to 3 people standing still in a sea of movement. Then, quietly, Ramon said, "He's here." Sophia turned. Keanu was still beneath the oak tree, hands in his pockets, watching them with a calm, almost invisible smile. Sophia made her way toward him. Ramon and Elena hung back, giving them space. As she reached him, Keanu took off his sunglasses. "I told you I'd be here," he said softly. "You didn't have to come." "I wanted to." Sophia looked down at the grass, then back up at him. "It means a lot." "I'm proud of you," he added. "Not just because you finished, but because of what you've become along the way." Sophia hesitated. "My dad told me..." "About what happened at the bank." Keanu didn't flinch. "Your father deserves better than what the world sometimes gives. That's not charity." She nodded, moved by the quiet power in his words. For a moment they stood there in silence. No camera flashes, no attention. Just a young woman and a man who understood what it meant to fight for dignity without shouting. Ramon and Elena eventually joined them. Keanu greeted them with the same warm familiarity as always. No pedestal, no separation, just presence. "You walked today?" he said to Elena. "I wasn't going to let a chair keep me from my daughter's day," she replied, smiling. "You look strong," he said. "I'm stronger than I look." Keanu chuckled, then grew quiet again. "Days like this," he said, "they're the real premieres." He handed Sophia a small envelope, not brown like her father's, but white and neat. "I don't usually give graduation gifts," he said, "but something told me this one mattered." Sophia opened it slowly. Inside was a donation receipt, made in her name to a free clinic in East Los Angeles. The same clinic she had once volunteered at during her first year of nursing school. "It's where I want to work," she said, her voice breaking. "After I pass the boards." "You already passed the most important test," Keanu said. She hugged him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it carried the full weight of gratitude that words couldn't hold. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and guests filtered out, Keanu slipped away without fanfare. He didn't stay for the dinner or the speeches. But his presence remained, not just in memory, but in action. Ramon stood with Elena, watching their daughter pose for one last picture in her gown. She laughed, radiant in the golden light. "She's going to heal people," Elena said. "He already has," Ramon replied. And with that, they walked to the car together. A family whole, a dream fulfilled. It was a quiet morning when Ramon noticed something unusual at his front door. There was no knock, no ringing of the bell, just a subtle scrape against the wood, like paper meeting floor. He opened the door and looked down. No envelope, no return address. Only a single sheet of paper, folded carefully in half, placed with intention and humility. Ramon picked it up gently. His fingers, calloused from years of labor, traced the crease as if sensing the weight of what it might contain. He walked to the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and sat at the table. Elena was still asleep. The house was still. The page remained unopened in his hands for several long minutes. Then, finally, he unfolded it. There was no greeting, no date, just handwriting. Neat, but uncertain. A voice trying to be heard without presumption. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't even see myself." Ramon's chest tightened. I wanted to write this for weeks, but every time I tried, it felt too easy, too late. Like words could fix what I had broken with my actions, but this letter isn't to fix anything. It's just to be honest. I'm in therapy now, not because I was told to go, I chose it, not to undo what I did, but to understand why I did it. When I looked at you that day at the bank, I didn't see a man. I saw everything I had buried. My father was a cab driver in Chicago. Worked double shifts, missed birthdays, always smelled like cigarettes and road salt. And I resented him. Not for what he did, but for how invisible he became. I hated the way people looked through him. And then I started doing the same thing, even after he died. Ramon read slowly, as if decoding not just words but pain. He remembered the way Brad's voice had cracked that night he came to visit. But this letter, it was different. Calmer, sharper. Not just confession, reflection. I think I judged you because it was easier than forgiving him. Or myself. You were standing there, holding dignity in your hands, and I didn't know how to face it. But you didn't raise your voice. You didn't demand. You saw me. And that did something I still don't know how to explain. Ramon set the letter down and exhaled slowly. His eyes wandered to the drawer by the hallway. Inside it were decades of quiet moments. Sophia's crayon drawings from kindergarten, old receipts from the mechanic shop he once dreamed of opening, and thank you notes Elena used to leave him in his lunchbox back when he drove 12 hours a day just to keep the lights on. That drawer was a record of things that mattered, not because they were loud, but because they were honest. He reached for the letter again. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not sure I've earned it. But I wanted you to know that your kindness didn't disappear into silence. It moved something in me. And I think it always will. Brad. Ramon folded the page slowly, carefully, not along the same crease but along a new one. He stood, walked to the hallway, and opened the drawer. He placed the letter beside Sophia's sketch of their family in front of a big blue house, and Alina's old notes that said things like, "You've got this," and "I made your favorite for dinner." Then he closed the drawer, not to forget, but to remember, quietly. That evening the house smelled like garlic and cumin. Elena had insisted on cooking, even though Ramon had offered to pick something up. She said she wanted the kitchen to feel alive again, like it used to when Sophia was little and they'd all sit down to stories over dinner. Ramon moved slowly, the weight of the letter still lingering in his mind. It wasn't heavy with guilt, not anymore. It was heavy with something deeper. Understanding. As the rice steamed and the beans simmered, Ramon sat by the window and watched the last light of the day stretch across the garden. The drawer remained closed, but he could feel its presence behind him. What lay inside was no longer just paper. It was the quiet culmination of decades of patience, disappointment, and quiet belief in human decency. He heard Elena behind him, humming as she stirred a pot. There was a familiar peace in the sound. He turned to her. "Did you sleep well today?" he asked gently. She smiled. "Well enough to cook. That's a win." He nodded, then paused. "Brad came by again," he said, almost as if testing the words on his tongue. Elena glanced up. "Did you talk?" "No, not this time," Ramon said. "He left a note." She turned off the stove and leaned against the counter, giving him her full attention. "Did you read it?" "Yes," he said. "It was on." "That's rare," she said, "especially from people who hurt you." Ramon looked down at his hands. He didn't ask for anything, just shared. "That means he's trying." The gymnast said in therapy, Ramon added. Said he's not trying to undo it, just trying to understand why. Elena wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to sit beside him. "You helped him start that journey," she said, "by not shutting the door in his face." "I didn't know what to say that night," Ramon admitted. "I just listened." Sometimes that's more powerful than anything else. They sat together in silence for a moment, listening to the distant sound of children laughing from a nearby yard. "I put the letter in the drawer," Ramon said. "The one with all the good things?" He nodded. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then maybe that's what this is too," she said. "Another good thing." He let her words settle. It was easy to dismiss apologies as empty, but this one hadn't come with fanfare or pressure, just quiet truth. Later that night, Sophia called from her apartment. She was preparing for her licensing exam. She sounded tired but focused. "Promise me you're both eating well," she said, half joking, half serious. "We are," Elena replied. "Your father even set the table." Ramon chuckled. They talked for a while, about nothing and everything. Then Sophia said something that lingered with Ramon long after the call ended. "You know, Dad, you've taught me more about forgiveness than any textbook ever could." He didn't know how to respond, so he just said, "Thank you, mija." After the call, he walked to the hallway one last time, opened the drawer, reached past the memories. His fingers touched Brad's letter again. He didn't need to read it tonight. But knowing it was there, knowing someone had looked into themselves and tried to change, was enough. Ramon closed the drawer and turned off the light. The morning sun peeked through the tall windows of the downtown auditorium, casting long, soft beams across the rows of chairs, slowly filling with employees in navy blazers and name tags. A podium stood centered on a modest stage, flanked by two simple banners. One read, "Empathy in Practice." The other read, "Graduation Ceremony, Class 1." Ramon stood backstage, adjusting the collar of his shirt, the same shirt he had ironed on the morning he walked into the bank. He had considered wearing something new, something more formal, but Elena had looked at him and said, "Wear the one that tells the full story." His hands were calm now. No envelope in his pocket, no trembling voice. Just the quiet steadiness of someone who had lived the moment everyone in this room had studied. The young coordinator gave him a nod. It was time. He stepped into the light. The room fell still. Even the hum of phones and side whispers faded. He walked to the podium slowly, letting the silence hold. Then he began. "My name is Ramon Alvarez," he said, his voice even. "I am a father, a husband, a son of immigrants. I've driven more miles in this city than most people will walk in a lifetime." A faint murmur of recognition passed through the crowd. "I've sat behind tinted windows while people forgot I could hear. I've opened doors for men who never made eye contact. I've waited outside five-star hotels in the rain so someone inside wouldn't get wet. I've been proud to do my job with dignity." He looked up. His eyes scanned the room, faces watching, listening. "And one morning, I walked into a bank with every dollar I'd saved, not for a car or a vacation, but for my wife's surgery, for her life. No reaction, no movement, just breath held. I was treated like a threat, like a liar, like I didn't belong in that space." Ramon paused, letting the weight settle. "And here's the truth," he continued. "That moment wasn't new, it was just louder. Louder than usual. Louder than I was taught to be." A woman in the front row pressed a tissue to her eye. "I didn't come here today to shame anyone. I didn't accept this invitation because I want sympathy." He took a small breath. "I came because change can start in a room like this." In the fifth row, Brad sat still, hands clasped tightly in his lap. He wore no name tag, no badge, just the expression of a man who had stopped running from who he had been. Ramon saw him. "I want to share what mattered to me," he said. It wasn't the viral video. It wasn't the news coverage. It was what happened after. He lifted his hand and pointed toward the audience, not accusingly, but openly. This program, this room, these sessions, they didn't exist before, but they do now, and that means something. He leaned slightly toward the microphone. "You all spent time learning about bias, judgment, listening. But here's the thing. None of those are lessons if they stay on paper. They only mean something if they show up when nobody's watching. He paused again, voice softer. I'm not special. I'm not famous. I don't have a title. But that's exactly why I was easy to ignore. A hush, a shift. And that's exactly why we need more of you to notice, to pause, to care. Ramon let the stillness breathe. No one shuffled. No one whispered. Even the clicking pens had stopped. What remained was attention. Real, quiet, full. He leaned slightly back from the microphone and looked around. I was asked what message I wanted to leave with you all today, he said. I thought about that question for days. I even wrote something down. But I left the paper at home this morning. A few soft smiles from the audience. Because what I realized is, you don't need a lecture. You don't need a list of things to memorize. He looked out again, his gaze lingering on Brad. You need to remember that sometimes the person you're helping isn't just someone on a form or a line in a system. Sometimes they are carrying everything they have, emotionally and financially, in a single envelope. And all they need is not approval, not permission, just dignity. A pause. He let that word sit. I didn't walk into that bank to teach anyone a lesson. I walked in to save my wife's life. But what happened in the days after? That was out of my hands. And maybe that's the point. Because we don't get to choose when our lives become someone else's example. We only get to choose what we do after. Brad's eyes were damp, his head lowered slightly. He didn't hide it. Ramon continued, his voice steady. There are people in this room who've never spoken a cruel word in their lives. But there are also people who have. And if you're sitting here today, it means you showed up. You decided to keep learning. And that matters more than you know. He looked toward the side of the stage, where a simple wooden plaque rested on a stand. It was engraved with the names of the program's first graduates, each one etched as a reminder of something intangible, growth. Ramon turned back to the microphone. This world doesn't need more heroes, he said softly. It needs more witnesses. The phrase landed differently. The room shifted with it. People who don't walk away, people who don't pretend not to see, people who stay when it's uncomfortable, who listen when it would be easier to explain, who see the person, not the job title, not the shoes, not the accent. The person. There was a long pause, then a breath. I'm grateful for the chance to be heard, Ramon said. Not because I'm angry, but because the truth is quieter than that. It's just been waiting. He stepped back from the podium. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then a single clap. Then another. Then a slow, building wave of applause, rising like a tide that had been waiting just beneath the surface. Ramon didn't bow. He simply nodded once, placing his hand over his heart. Then he stepped away. As he moved back toward the side of the stage, he passed Brad, who stood, silently, no words, just a look. A look of something broken open and beginning again. Outside the auditorium, the city hummed as usual. Horns, footsteps, street vendors. But inside, something had shifted. Not with headlines, not with outrage, but with presence, and with a man who chose to speak so others could finally learn how to see. The afternoon sun filtered softly through the branches of the hospital courtyard trees. A breeze stirred the crisp edges of a local newspaper folded on the bench beside Ramon. He sat still, hands folded loosely, shoulders relaxed. The buzz of city traffic hummed just beyond the garden walls, but inside this little space, time felt slower, more reflective. Beside him sat his daughter, Sophia, in her white coat, her hospital badge clipped neatly to the front pocket. It was her first official week as a trauma nurse. The hospital was the same one her mother had been treated in years ago. The same one they'd feared, hoped in, prayed through. And now she was part of it. walking the halls not as a patient's daughter, but as someone capable of healing others. They watched as interns and scrubs hustled across the courtyard, rushing back from break, phones pressed to ears, clipboards clutched. Nurses and doctors weaved through them with the practiced calm of routine. Somewhere above, a helicopter descended toward the rooftop pad. Life, in its rawest forms, passed them by. Sophia leaned her head gently on her father's shoulder. "Feels strange being on this side of the bench," she whispered. Ramon smiled faintly. "You've earned it," he said. She nodded, then paused. Her fingers fiddled with the edge of her badge. "Do you ever wish it didn't happen?" she asked. Ramon knew exactly what she meant. The bank, the humiliation, the fallout, the public attention, the conversations that followed, the weight of it all. He looked ahead, not rushing to answer. "No," he said quietly, "because it showed the world who we are." Sophia looked over at him. "Who we are?" "Yes," he said. "Not just me. You. Your mother. The kind of strength that doesn't scream, that just keeps going. I always thought that kind of strength didn't matter because it didn't make noise, but now I know it's the only kind that really does." Sophia blinked, eyes glistening. "I still remember that night," she said. "Mom had just fallen asleep, and I heard the door. You came home so quiet. I asked you how the bank went, and you said, 'It's all right, mija.'" Ramon nodded slowly. "I didn't want you to see what I felt," he said. "I wanted you to focus on your studies. Not on my pride." She took his hand. "I knew anyway," she said. "But it wasn't what made me want to be a nurse." He turned slightly to face her. "It wasn't?" She shook her head. "It was watching you carry Mom all those months, the dialysis trips, the cooking, the worry. You never let it drown you, even when I saw you struggling." Ramon exhaled gently. "I tried," he said. "I really tried to keep it together." "You did," she whispered. "You always did." They sat in silence for a long moment, not the kind of silence that comes from not knowing what to say, but the kind that doesn't need to be filled. From across the street, a familiar figure appeared. Keanu, dressed in jeans and a soft black jacket, hands tucked casually in his pockets. He wasn't walking fast, just moving like someone who didn't need to be anywhere in particular, but somehow was always exactly where he needed to be. He looked up and spotted them. Sophia lifted her hand, giving a small wave. Keanu smiled and returned the wave. A simple nod followed, quiet, knowing. He didn't cross the street. He didn't need to. In that moment, nothing had to be said. They all remembered, and they all understood. Ramon watched Keanu walk out of sight, disappearing behind a bus stop. His presence, brief as it was, left behind something warm. Not fanfare, not spectacle, just presence. And it meant more than words. Sophia turned back toward her father, the breeze playing with a loose strand of hair near her cheek. "Hell still does that," she said, smiling. "Shows up without needing to be seen." Ramon nodded. "He's always been that way." Sophia tilted her head, a bit curious now. "Did he ever talk to you about why he did what he did at the bank? I mean, all of it. Standing up like that wasn't small." Ramon smiled gently, gazing ahead. "Palm night, months after it all happened," he said. "We were waiting in the car outside a charity gala. He didn't want to go in just yet. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said..." Ramon paused, eyes narrowing slightly as he remembered the exact tone, the weight of those words. "Ed, sometimes the world tells people like you to stay in the background. I just wanted to remind them that people like you are the reason anything moves forward at all." Sophia's throat tightened. She blinked back tears. "Elm said that," she asked. Ramon nodded. "He meant it," he said. "But what mattered more is that he never said it to cameras, never posted it, never turned it into a cause. He just lived it." Sophia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. Carefully, she unfolded it and handed it to him. "I wrote this down after graduation," she said. "It's just something I couldn't stop thinking about." Ramon took it and read the small handwriting. "Grace isn't what we give to others after they've earned it. It's what we offer before they believe they deserve it." He looked up at her. "You wrote that?" She shrugged. "It's what I've learned, Dad. From you, from Mom, from everything." He folded the paper gently and placed it into his wallet. "Then I'll carry it," he said. They sat a while longer, watching a small child help her grandmother up the curb. A pair of nurses laughed quietly as they passed by. Life continued, but for Ramon, this bench felt like a milestone. Not just a place to rest, but a marker. A quiet finish line that didn't come with a trophy, but with a deep breath and a view of how far they'd come. "You nervous for your night shift?" he asked, glancing sideways. She chuckled, terrified. "You'll be great," he said. "Just listen, speak gently, show up when they least expect kindness." She leaned her head against his shoulder again. "Like you did?" He didn't answer right away. "No," he said finally. "Better." The sun had dipped slightly lower, casting gold across the parking lot. The shadows stretched longer now, but the light, what remained of it, felt earned. Sophia stood and adjusted her badge. "We'd better head in," she said. Ramon stood too, smoothing out the same pressed shirt from that day in the bank. He hadn't worn it for memory. He'd worn it because it still fit, and because that day hadn't broken him. It had built something. He kissed Sophia's forehead. "Be safe," he said. "I will," she replied. She walked up the stairs and disappeared into the automatic doors, swallowed into the rhythm of beeping machines, fast steps, and fluorescent lights. Ramon turned back to the bench for a moment, sat once more, let his hands rest on his knees. Then he looked across the street, half expecting to see Keanu again. But the sidewalk was quiet now. Still, that wave remained, unspoken, suspended in memory. A nod that had said everything. A year later, the world hadn't changed overnight. But for Ramon, something in the air felt lighter. The past 12 months had moved gently, quietly, like the ripples left behind after a stone sinks beneath the surface. There was no breaking news now, no headlines, just the steady rhythm of life resumed, stronger for what it had been through. Ramon still wore the same pressed shirt every Sunday, not for fashion, but for memory. It hung differently now, not with tension or grief, but with quiet pride. His story had traveled far beyond that bank lobby. Clips of the moment when Keanu calmly stood beside him and asked a question that silenced the room had reached boardrooms, classrooms, and conferences across the country. But what mattered more than the virality was what came after. Leadership seminars had begun using Ramon's story as a core lesson. They didn't highlight rage, they highlighted restraint. They didn't champion outrage, they championed observation, humility, the courage to see another person as whole. The seminars weren't just about unconscious bias, they became about presence, about how easy it is to misjudge someone when you've never taken the time to know their name. Ramon didn't need to stand behind a podium to be heard. His experience did the speaking, and he was fine with that. Back home, Elena's strength had returned in waves, not all at once, but enough. Enough for her to walk to the corner store alone again. Enough for her to volunteer twice a week at the patient support center in the very hospital where their daughter now worked. Her voice became part of the welcome committee for women recently diagnosed with chronic illness. She never tried to fix anyone. She just listened, held hands, shared what pain had taught her, and in doing so, she healed a little more herself. At first, Ramon thought she was doing it for distraction, but he came to understand it wasn't about forgetting what they'd been through. It was about making sure it meant something. Sophia, their daughter, had settled into the chaos of night shifts and nursing duties. Some nights, she'd come home too tired to speak. Other nights, she'd sit on the couch beside Ramon and recount a patient who'd said something profound, or funny, or simply brave. And every now and then, she'd ask her father the same question. Do you think it would have happened the same way if Keanu hadn't been there? Ramon's answer never changed. No, he'd say, but I think the right people always show up, one way or another. As for Keanu, not much had changed publicly. He still took on films that meant something to him, still walked into sets quietly, still signed autographs without being asked, still refused to let the moment at the bank define him. But something between the two men had shifted. Where once there had been a quiet professionalism, now there was something deeper. They talked more often, not about the past, but about life, about what mattered. Sometimes the conversations happened in the car, between locations. Sometimes they happened at diners after long days. But most often, they happened in silence, side by side, saying little, needing less. One Friday evening, as the sun began to dip behind the horizon, Ramon parked the car just a little farther from the studio than usual. Keanu, already unbuckling his seatbelt, paused when he saw the view. In front of them, the hills blushed pink and orange, the city humming faintly below. Let's sit a minute, Keanu said. They didn't need to talk about why. Ramon turned off the engine, leaned back, and let the silence settle in like an old friend. Keanu finally broke it, but not with a question, just a simple statement. You know, when I was younger, I always thought justice had to be loud. Ramon looked over, waiting. But it's not, Keanu said. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is just stand still, look someone in the eye, refuse to be moved. Ramon nodded. That's what you did. Keanu shook his head slightly. No, that's what you've done your whole life. They sat like that until the light faded. There had been no formal award, no medal, no recognition that came with plaques or ceremonies. But there had been something better. There had been growth. Brad had continued his therapy, stayed with the outreach group, and begun mentoring other young employees entering the banking world, not as a hero, but as someone honest about his own mistakes. He had written one more letter to Ramon, short and simple. I'm still learning. And I'm grateful I get to. Ramon had pinned that note inside his drawer, not far from Sophia's first crayon drawing of a nurse, and Elena's handwritten, I'm proud of you, tucked between old birthday cards. That drawer had become more than storage. It was a timeline, a museum of survival, dignity, and forgiveness. Occasionally, Ramon would take the notes out and read them again. Not because he needed reassurance, but to remind himself that people could change, and that sometimes the smallest ripples reached the farthest shores. One day, after dropping Keanu off, Ramon pulled into a small cafe near the clinic. He had a half hour before picking up Elena. Inside, a young man at the counter glanced up from the register. You're the guy from that video, right? Ramon hesitated. The barista smiled. You changed the way my manager trains us? Ramon smiled back, quietly. That wasn't me. That was life reminding us how to treat people. And with that, he ordered a tea, left a tip, and sat by the window, watching the world move. From where he sat, everything looked the same, but he knew it wasn't.